Shalom, family. This is Yuda Yasharel, and today we want to talk about the truth revealed, the two Josephs. I don't know if y'all have discovered in the scriptures from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Now, when you get to the New Testament, it seems that we're talking about another Joseph. And the New Testament has tried to convince the world, and did a pretty good job, convincing the world that the Joseph that married Mary was Jacob's son, Joseph. I don't see that. So I want to go through this slow and careful because I want to point some things out, and hopefully you guys will see what I see. And I'm not going to say that I'm 100% correct, but based on the scriptures and what I've been able to find, I would say I'm pretty close. But there appears to be two Josephs in the scriptures. So let's start with Amos chapter 3 and verse 7. Surely the sovereign creator does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. Now we're talking about a plan. Now, just for a minute, I want you to entertain the thought or the concept of JC, so-called Jesus, being prophesied to come back a second time as the king or the ruler. That's a pretty big plan. Now, I'm pretty sure when the Most High spoke in Amos 3 and 7, he meant what he said, that he would not do anything different unless he first told his servants, the prophets. This would be a plan. If he's going to appoint Jesus as our king or ruler or Messiah, that's a plan. So if you look at Amos 3 and 7, he don't mention that plan. I wanted to put that out there first. So let's read a little bit about Joseph. And I want y'all to pay very close attention because I'm going to distinguish these two Josephs. We're going to try to establish a timeline from the true Joseph, Jacob's son, from this Joseph in the New Testament. And let's see where we end up. Joseph was born in Mesopotamian, in the Mesopotamian town of Haran, to his parents, Jacob and Rachel. At the age of 6, he left Haran along with his family and journeyed to the land of Canaan, eventually settling in Hebron. Jacob displayed extra affection to Joseph, who was born to his father's old age, presenting him with a specially crafted garment. This promoted feelings of jealousy within his brothers, especially the sons of Jacob's other wife, Leah. These ill feelings exacerbated when Joseph repeated two of his dreams to them, in which he was portrayed as ruling over his brothers. In the first, the brothers were gathering wheat in the field, and the brothers' bundles bowed to Joseph's bundle. In the second, Joseph envisioned the sun, the moon, and 11 stars, symbolizing his parents and brothers bowing to him. One day, Jacob instructed Joseph to visit his brothers in Shechem, where they were tending their sheep. Little did he know that this would be the last time he would see his dear son. He's talking about Jacob not seeing Joseph again. Not seeing his dear son until their reunion along 22 years later. Seizing their chance, the brothers threw the unsuspecting Joseph into a pit. A short while later, they spotted an Arab caravan passing the scene, and the brothers sold Joseph to the traders. He was eventually brought to Egypt, where he was sold to Potiphar, one of the king's Pharaoh's ministers. Now, this is the Joseph that was born to Jacob, the progenitor of the 12 tribes. Now, did Joseph die before Jesus? Let's look a little further into this. The circumstances of Joseph's death are not known, but it is likely that he died before Jesus' ministry began, and it is implied that he was dead before the crucifixion. Now, what I'm reading you now is from the Christianity's concept. And I'm doing this because I want y'all to spot the timeline and the differences. Once Jacob was dead, the brothers were scared that Joseph would take revenge on them for selling him. They sent a message to Joseph saying that before his death, Jacob had instructed them to tell Joseph to forgive them. They then offered to be his slaves. Joseph reassured them, saying that the Most High intended for him to go down to Egypt to ensure the survival of many people, and Joseph would take care of them and their children. So Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household remained in Egypt. Now listen, Joseph lived 110 years. He saw great-grandchildren from both his sons before he died. He told his brothers that the Most High would one day bring them up from Egypt into the land that the Most High promised their fathers. He made them swear to carry his bones out of Egypt into the land. Joseph died and was embalmed. Let me read that again. He made them swear to carry his bones out of Egypt into that land, that promised land. Now Joseph died and was embalmed and put in a coffin in Egypt. This part is very important, so keep this in mind. Joseph died and was embalmed and put in a coffin in Egypt. When the Jews eventually left Egypt, Moses carried out Joseph's bones. Joseph was buried in Shechem on a piece of land that Jacob previously bought. Joseph's two sons both became tribes in Israel, and the northern Israelite kingdom is many times referred to as the house of Joseph. Now I want to run this by you real quick, because during the time Joseph was in Egypt, he had a wife. Potiphar gave him a wife. Now, it's been understood mistakenly that Joseph's wife was Egyptian. Well, Asenath was not Egyptian. She was adopted. And I don't want to get too deep into that because it would stretch this out. I think this lesson is going to be long enough as it is. But Asenath was not Egyptian. She was raised by Egyptians, just like Moses. He was raised by Egyptians and he was called the Egyptian, but he was Hebrew. And we're going to see a little bit more about Asenath a little later on. Asenath was Joseph's spouse. That was his wife. Joseph had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. You can find that in Genesis 46 and 20. Now let me read the parents as they are listed. Jacob the father, Rachel the mother, and here are the relatives. Reuben, half-brother, Simeon, half-brother, Levi, half-brother, Judah, half-brother, Dan, half-brother, Naphtali, half-brother, Gad, half-brother, Issachar, half-brother, Zebulun, half-brother, Dinah, half-sister, Benjamin, half-brother, and Rebekah, grandmother, Isaac, grandfather, Esau, uncle, Leah, aunt or stepmother, Laban, grandfather and great-uncle, Abraham, great-grandfather, Sarah, great-grandmother, and Potipharah, father-in-law. Now, Joseph's age at his death, according to the New Testament, was 90 years old. All right? Y'all really stay with me on this, because I want to show you something. The New Testament says that Joseph's age at death was 90 years old. Okay, now up here we see that when Joseph died, he was 110 years old. The New Testament says that he was 90. Right here. Now, it wasn't the only document that did so. In another early text, the history of Joseph, the carpenter. Now, when I bring these things out, I want y'all to think about it. When did we ever read in the Old Testament or the Torah where Joseph was a carpenter? Now, if y'all think back, when Joseph was sold into Egyptian slavery by his brothers, he was a child. He was a teenager. So he didn't do any carpentry work. It never said anything about Joseph doing carpentry work. So they're setting this up to put JC in here. The history of Joseph the carpenter, which was composed in Egypt between the 6th and 7th centuries, Christ himself tells the story of his stepfather. That's a lie. Claiming Joseph was 90 years old when he married Mary and died at 111. Now remember, we just showed you that he died in Egypt at the age of 110. Now I want y'all to keep these timelines, because I'm going to show you the real truth about the lie of the New Testament. When he married Mary and died at 111, Joseph was the one whose dreams from the Most High came true. He was also able to interpret other people's dreams. Remember, he did that in Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old. Y'all keep up with these numbers. Joseph was 30 years old when the Pharaoh of Egypt made him second in charge. All right, this is Joseph in Egypt after he had been sold into Egyptian slavery. Now the Pharaoh of Egypt made him second in charge. He died, here we go, at 110 years old in Egypt. His bones were taken back to the land of his birth. And that's something else we're going to talk about too, because the New Testament gives their Joseph, a whole new birthplace. But yet they claim this is the same Joseph from the days of Egypt. But I'm going to point something out. I'm going to point something out that clearly shows you they lied. Joseph was 30 years old when the Pharaoh of Egypt made him second in charge. He died at 110 years old in Egypt. His bones were taken back to the land of his birth when Moses led the people out of Egypt about 400 years later. Please remember that number. Moses led the people out of Egypt about 400 years after Joseph's death. Now, how old was Joseph when he married Mary? The Bible did not give any details on how old Joseph was when he married Mary. However, there are some suggestions from different sources. Some sources claim that Mary had passed the age of puberty, which is why she was able to get pregnant. Also, it was not legal for a girl who had not passed 12 years old to be married. Therefore, since the Bible calls Joseph a just man, we can assume that he stuck to the cultural dictates before engaging Mary. So there is a probability that Joseph was around 20 years old when he married Mary. Keep up with these numbers, people. I'm going to show y'all something. Another source claims that when Mary and Joseph migrated to Bethlehem, it was for tax payments as decreed by Caesar. Hence, the couple had turned 18 years old or older since they went to Bethlehem to pay tax. That was the tax-bearing age. Here is the genealogy of Matthew. We're getting into the New Testament. Now, I want to show y'all something. We're not teaching New Testament. We're going to show you the lie of the New Testament. And this, I haven't found anybody teaching on this. Now, maybe you guys have, and if you have, great. I'd like for you to share some of that with me. But as I've been looking, and I look at a lot of teachers, I have not seen anybody touch this subject. So here's the genealogy of Matthew chapter 1, showing the 14 generations. And I want y'all to pay very close attention to this genealogy. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Perez, Hezron, Ram, Aminadab, Nahshon, Salmon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joram, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, that was Hezekiah's father, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Amon, Josiah, Jeconiah. Now, Babylon captivity due to Israel's disobedience to the Most High's law was Shealtiel, Zerubbabel, Abiud, Eliakim, Azar, Zadok, Akim, Eliud, Eleazar, Matan, Jacob, Joseph, and look at this, Mary. Now, the Most High said in Genesis clearly that one seed shall bear the seed of its kind. True or false? In other words, in order for me to plant my seed into my spouse, We must lay together. This is a physical act. So the reason I'm going through this is because the Most High, when he shows the genealogy, he never shows women. It's always the men. But we got Mary here. So now we're supposed to assume or believe that Mary had a seed which produced Jesus. Now, since the Most High says that nothing shall grow unless it comes from a seed, where did Mary get the seed? I know some of y'all are going to say from the Holy Spirit. But listen to that carefully. The Holy Spirit. That's not flesh. It's not physical. So there is no seed. That's a bastard child. The Most High does not allow bastard children into the kingdom. So the Holy Spirit could not have impregnated Mary. And Jesus cannot be from the line of David. Where's the seed? There has to be a seed planted by a bloodline. So some man from the genealogy of Isaac, or all the way back from Adam, all the way up to now, had to lay with Mary. Now they said this was a virgin birth, but see, here's what they got wrong. The word virgin in the Torah, if you take the time to look it up, is the word Alma. So virgin doesn't mean a woman that has not had sexual intercourse. Virgin, the word virgin in the Torah means Alma, which is a young woman of marital age. She's old enough to marry. That's what it means. And I believe that word was 5579 or 5572. I don't remember exactly. But it means a woman, a young woman of marriageable age. It don't mean a woman who's never had sex. Okay, moving forward. Now, let's look at Joseph's death in Egypt from a different perspective. Joseph was 30 years old when the Pharaoh of Egypt made him second in charge. He died at 110 years old in Egypt. His bones were taken back to the land of his birth when Moses led the people out of Egypt 400 years later. Now, let's go back up here and look at the where Joseph was born. Okay. Joseph was born in Mesopotamia. That's where Moses took his bones. All right, so let's go back. Now, let's see. Joseph, he died at 110 years old in Egypt. His bones were taken back to the land of his birth. Now remember, there is no New Testament now. So at this time, there is no Mary, and Joseph only had one wife. That was, how do you pronounce her name? Anasath. He only had one wife and two sons. So when he died, his wife and two sons were left. There was no Mary. All right? We know this is a fact. There was no Mary. There was only Asenath and Manasseh and Ephraim. Now, how old was Joseph when he married Mary? This is the New Testament. Watch this. The Bible did not give any details on how old Joseph was when he married Mary. However, there are some suggestions from different sources. Some sources claim that Mary had passed the age of puberty. I've already read that, which they say Joseph was around 20 years old. Now, did y'all notice how this jumped from the Old Testament when Joseph was married to Anaseth? I can't pronounce her name. Anaseth. And at that time, he was well into his 100 years old. And now here, he's getting ready to marry Mary, and he's 20 years old. How's that possible? Another source claimed that when Mary and Joseph migrated to Bethlehem, I read that already. Okay, we went through all this. Y'all remember these numbers, all right? Now, here we see Moses took the bones of Joseph back to the land of Mesopotamia 400 years later, after Joseph's death. Now let's look at Exodus chapter 13 and verse 19. Joseph looked at after his brothers and their families, even after his brothers tried to harm him when he was still a what? A teenager. Joseph was still a very powerful man in Egypt. He was second in charge under Pharaoh. Jacob promised to Joseph he, as a people, would go back to the land, and Jacob would give to Joseph one portion more than his brothers. And I want y'all to remember that too, because at the very end of this lesson, I'm going to share something with you concerning this. So let me read it one more time. Jacob promised to Joseph he, as a people, would go back to the land, and Jacob would give to Joseph one portion more than to his brothers. That includes Manasseh and Ephraim. This portion would be the ridge of land that he took from the Amorites with his sword and bow. Now, Joseph's wife and 2 sons. Joseph was sworn to do as his father asked of him in Genesis 47, verse 27 to 31. Later, Joseph came to visit his father, having with him his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Israel declared that they would be heirs to the inheritance of the house of Israel, as if they were his own children, just as Reuben and Simeon were. Joseph's wife, again, Asenath. Okay. Daughter of the Egyptian priest, Potiphar. Asenath, now I want to explain something here, because they said daughter of the Egyptian priest. And as I mentioned earlier, she was adopted. I'm going to prove that to you in just a little bit. Daughter of Egyptian priest Potiphar, Asenath becomes the wife of Joseph, not Mary. We don't see a Mary here. This is Joseph and his wife Asenath. And mother of Ephraim and Manasseh. So these 2 sons are the sons of Asenath, Joseph's only wife. Okay? Asenath appears in 3 verses in the Bible. Genesis chapter 41, verse 45, Genesis chapter 41, verse 50, and Genesis chapter 46, verse 20. And Genesis chapter 41 and 45 reads, Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. Thus Joseph gained authority over the land of Egypt. Genesis 41 and 50 says, Before the years of famine came, Joseph had two sons, whom Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Genesis chapter 46 and 20 reads, To Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. As the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh, Asenath becomes a matriarch for two tribes of Israel. Now, we're going to go through this, and I want you guys to see if you can tie Joseph from the Old Testament to the Joseph in the New Testament. I want y'all to try to tie those two together. From these references, we learn that Asenath was the daughter of an Egyptian priest. That's what they say. Who served foreign gods. This affiliation appears in all three references. A later Jewish audience may have questioned Asenath's character. Did someone of foreign faith truly belong in the bloodline of not one, but two Israelite tribes? Did y'all get that? Let me ask you again. Did someone of foreign faith truly belong in the bloodline of not one, but two Israelite tribes? In other words, they're saying Asenath could not have been Egyptian. This had to be a Hebrew woman. We're going to see a little bit more later. The story of Joseph and Asenath, which adamantly defends Asenath's character and demonstrates her devotion to the Jew faith, would have put such questions to rest. According to the story of Joseph and Asenath, Asenath was a paradigm of virtue and grace. Now listen to the rest of this very carefully. The following details from the story have assured a Jewish audience of Asenath's good character. Details about Asenath in the story of Joseph and Asenath. Asenath disdains marriage until Joseph appears on the scene. No other suitor, not even Pharaoh's son, could catch her eye. She wasn't interested in none of them. She didn't want none of these guys. Asenath converts to Joseph's faith. Before meeting Joseph, Asenath was devoted to the worship of her gods, the one she grew up worshiping. Just like us, when we grew up worshiping JC. This is the same thing happening here. Now watch what happens. Asenath converts to Joseph's faith. Before meeting Joseph, Asenath was devoted to the worship of her gods. Although her love of Joseph is what initially prompts her conversion, the text makes clear that Asenath's conversion was genuine. She didn't fake it. She disowns her former religion and repents, mourning in ashes for a full week. Asenath's conversion is confirmed by an angelic visit. In the story of Joseph and Asenath, an angel visits Asenath on the 8th day of her mourning, says that the Most High has heard her prayers and gives her a new name. He also confirms that she will marry Joseph. This is the Most High telling Asenath, you're going to marry Joseph. The Most High is giving his approval for a Egyptian woman to marry Joseph? No, this woman was not Egyptian. But the Most High says he confirmed that she will marry Joseph and lets her eat of heavenly honeycomb, which imparts heavenly knowledge to her. Asenath prays to the Most High for deliverance. Later in the story, Pharaoh's son devises a plot to kill Joseph and kidnap Asenath. As his plan unfolds, Asenath finds herself surrounded by enemies. She responds by praying to the Most High, who miraculously intervenes. The swords of her enemies turn to ashes. Asenath protects Dan, Gad, Naphtali, and Asher, 4 of Joseph's brothers, even after they conspire with Pharaoh's son to kill Joseph and kidnap her. She shows mercy and forgiveness. At the end of the story of Joseph and Asenath, the Egyptian throne passes to Joseph, and he rules for 48 years, from devout wife to noble queen. Asenath served as an example of virtue. So, was Asenath an Egyptian? Let's take a look at this, and y'all listen carefully. He had a daughter, and Parthenos, or virgin, that's what this word means, who was 18 years old, and she was, listen carefully, much taller and more attractive and beautiful in appearance than all the Parthenon in the land. They're talking about Asenath, how she looked compared to the Egyptian women. So listen carefully. She was in no way like the Egyptian Parthenon, but was in every way like the daughters of the Hebrew. Why do you think that was? To this very day, the Hebrew men and women do not look like the other nations, black or not. There is something different about us. Says, but was in every way like the daughters of the Hebrews. She was tall like Sarah, attractive like Rebekah, and beautiful like Rachel. And the name of that Parthenos was Asenath. The report of her beauty spread throughout all that land as far as the ends of the inhabited world. And all the sons of notable men, sons of satraps, sons of all the kings, all young and powerful men were attempting to court her. So Asenath was not Egyptian. Potiphar adopted her and raised her as an Egyptian. So why were Manasseh and Ephraim called half tribes? Now, I wanted to add this in here because, well, first let's talk about what we just read. First of all, Joseph in the New Testament, I think was said that he was born in Bethlehem or somewhere in that region, when we clearly saw that Joseph in the Old Testament was born in Mesopotamia. And this is 400 years later, after Joseph is dead. So what happened? Did Joseph come back alive and join the New Testament creatures and get a new wife? Remember, Amos 3 and 7. Moses says, surely I will do nothing unless first I reveal my plan to my servants, the prophets. Well, the prophets didn't know anything about a coming JC or Jesus or Mary or this new Joseph. You see, these are two Josephs we're talking about here. And the New Testament writers figured they'll never see it. They'll never catch that. So, why were Manasseh and Ephraim called half-tribes? Joshua 14:4. For the sons of Joseph were two tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. And they did not give a portion to the Levites in the land, except cities to live in, with their pasture lands for their livestock and for their property. Manasseh is the ancestor of the tribe of Manasseh. The tribe grows much more significant. Now this is, see, there is no such thing as a half tribe. And the reason I say that is because that would mean there were 13 tribes. Well, we know there was no 13 tribes. There were 12 tribes. So let's look at what happened. Manasseh is the ancestor of the tribe of Manasseh. The tribe grows. They grew much more significant between the Exodus and entering the Promised Land. So large that Moses ends up dividing the tribe into two half tribes. In other words, he put one tribe over here, same tribe, same people. They put Manasseh here and Ephraim over here, but they were the same tribe. It was associated with the tribe of Ephraim and Benjamin during the wanderings in the wilderness. They encamped on the west side of the Holy Tabernacle. Those listed of the tribe of Manasseh were 32,000. Numbers chapter 1, verse 35. Those are the clans of Manasseh, and those listed were 52,700. Numbers 26 in verse 34. And Moses gave to them, to the people of Gad, and to the people of Reuben, and to the half tribe of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the land and its cities with their territories, the cities of the land throughout the country. So why did Moses divide Manasseh and Ephraim? Joseph's tribe received a double inheritance because of the birthright. Manasseh was the oldest. This double inheritance was divided between Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. As a result, these two sons were given status as separate tribes in Israel. Look at Genesis chapter 48 and verse 5. Some say there were 13 tribes. Ephraim and Manasseh was divided, but not separated tribes. They just occupied different portions of the land. So there are no 13 tribes. So the timeline between the 400 years after Joseph had died, the New Testament comes up 400 years later, or maybe more, maybe 800 years later. And here we got Joseph again, only now he's marrying a virgin, so to speak, Mary. But he's already dead. So we can't be talking about the Joseph from the Torah. So we have to be talking about another Joseph, one that this book of lies created in order to deceive you. Do y'all see what I'm seeing? And please, leave some comments. I want to hear what anybody thinks about what we have seen today. We can say without any doubt Joseph did not travel through time and enter into the era of the New Testament. He was already dead and gone. Moses packed his bones and took him to Mesopotamia. So he couldn't have got married again. And I think that is more than enough. So I'm going to say shalom, family. Oh, and by the way, the Sabbath is Friday for the rest of this coming month. For the rest of this month. We spotted the new moon last Friday. So this coming Friday is the Sabbath, and it will be Friday every week until the next new moon. Shalom.